Welcome to the Arboretum. My name's Jenny, and behind the camera, that's Kitty.
Hello.
And we're the Naturalist Interns here at the Arboretum. And today, we're in a very special collection. This is the Dwarf Conifer collection. And this is a really cool place. If you ever come by, I definitely recommend you visit it because, like its name suggests, all the conifers in this area are actually dwarf varieties. And I know a lot of you are looking at these conifers and thinking to yourself, some of these are pretty big, but believe it or not, they are actually still smaller than what they normally would be. So this is the Dwarf Conifer collection. And today we're in this space because we thought this is a great area to visit certain trees and talk about a very seasonally appropriate topic, and that is tree leaves. Because if you look all around me right now, all the leaves right now are starting to change color and drop in the fall. So why don't we have a little closer look at maybe the tree right behind me and talk about that a little bit. So this is a sugar maple, and maples like this are notorious for the beautiful colors they take on in the fall. And these guys are a part of a group of trees that drop their leaves in the fall and stay bare all winter long. And these trees that lose their leaves are called deciduous trees. And most deciduous trees also tend to have broad leaves. And what I mean by broad leaves is if we look at like the leaf blade here, the leaf forms a very large flat surface. So there's a ton of surface area. The leaf itself is very broad. And at first, if we think about it, it seems kind of nonsensical for them to just lose their leaves every year, right? Because leaves, they take a lot of resources to grow. So to just drop them every year seems not to make very much sense. But if we look a little bit closer, we'll notice that this is actually a survival mechanism. See, these big broad leaves, they're really delicate. So with things like cold and wind and snow and ice, all these things that are around in our nice Canadian winters, these broad leaves can be very easily damaged. Not only that, but the big broad surface area means that they lose water very easily through them. So trees, if they lose all their water through these leaves in the winter, they can't easily replace it because a lot of it is frozen. So a lot of these trees with broad leaves tend to drop them in the winter just as a survival mechanism. And they make up for this for having bare branches and an inability to photosynthesize and make food in winter by having all this surface area in the summer. See, all the surface area, even though it's disadvantageous in the winter, it's really handy in the summer because it captures so much more sunlight. And the sunlight is going to fuel photosynthesis, the process in which these trees make sugars, make food. So there's a bit of a trade-off here. They're very delicate and have to be dropped to make up for their delicateness in the winter, but they make up for that by being able to make tons of food in the summer, in the growing season. And interestingly enough, we'll notice actually before they drop, they turn these beautiful colors. They turn from green to these beautiful reds and oranges. And that has to do with why these leaves are being dropped. You see, as the days get shorter and colder, the tree sends hormones out to the leaves, preparing them to be dropped. And because they're not going to be photosynthesizing anymore after they're dropped, these leaves stop making chlorophyll. And what chlorophyll is it's a green pigment that's really important in photosynthesis. When they stop making this in preparation for dropping the leaves, all the green pigment eventually goes away, and instead all the other colors, all the other pigments in the leaf already, all the reds and yellows, start to show through because they're not covered up by all the green anymore. So in the fall, it's not that these leaves gain yellow and red colors. They actually just lose their green color, so the other colors underneath it show up better, which I think is pretty cool. But of course, not all trees are broadleafed and not all trees are deciduous. So actually, why don't we turn things over to Kitty and talk about some of these other trees we might see around.
Yeah, so we are in the dwarf conifers collection after all, so let's go and check out a conifer. Follow me. All right, so we are here at a different tree. The sign over there tells us that this is a Norway spruce. Of course, Norway spruces are normally really tall, and this is just a really tiny variety, so a really cool one to take a look at. But let's take a look at its leaves. They're so cute. They're really small. So unlike the broad leaves of a maple, these guys have really thin needle-like leaves. So they're much different. And of course, this is a coniferous tree, which means it produces cones. So take a look at this tiny baby cone here. Of course, this dwarf variety also produces really small cones, so it's kind of really cool to look at. But this is a coniferous tree, and this coniferous tree is actually what we call an evergreen. So if you come back here in the middle of winter where there's snow everywhere, it's really cold, these guys are still gonna be green. Unlike things like maples and other broadleaf trees, which will have bare branches, all these needle-like leaves are still gonna be on this Norway spruce. And that's because these needle-like leaves offer some advantages in the winter that broadleaf don't have. So let's take another look at these needles. They're really long and really thin, and that means that they would lose a lot less water in the winter because there's not that much surface area for the water to evaporate. Not only that, but it's covered in a thick waxy substance to help conserve water in the cold as well. And because they are thinner, these guys are much better to withstand things like ice and snow and wind. It wouldn't wreck these leaves as if they were really big and wide. So these thin needle-like leaves of this spruce are really good for helping this tree survive in the winter, and that means it can stay on the branches all year long. It doesn't drop its leaves. That's why we call this an evergreen tree. Now, of course, not all coniferous trees like this are evergreen. Not all of them stay green all year round. So let's take a look at another example of a coniferous tree. So this big beautiful tree here is a tamarack. And this tamarack is another example of a coniferous tree. It also produces cones, just like the spruce that we looked at a little bit earlier. Let's try to see if we can find one of their cones. So I have one right here for you guys. So just like the spruce we looked at a little bit earlier, the tamarack also produces cones. And just like the spruce, it also has thin needle-like leaves. But unlike the spruce, if you were to touch the needles on this tamarack, the needles are really soft. They're not stiff like the spruce needles. And that's because the tamarack actually doesn't keep its needles all year long. This is not an evergreen tree. So a lot of people, when they think of the word evergreen, they automatically think of the word coniferous as well. They imagine a coniferous tree in their mind usually. And the tamarack is an exception to the rule, but this coniferous tree actually is a deciduous tree, just like a maple, just like an oak, just like other broadleaf trees like that. except it looks a little bit like all of the other evergreen trees where it has cones and it has needles, but they actually lose their needles every year. So if you keep an eye on our collection and you take a look at the tamaracks and the larches and the dawn redwoods that we have here on the Arboretum grounds, in the fall, the needles are going to start to change color just like the maple leaves, and then they're just going to drop to the ground, and all winter long these branches are going to be bare. So that's a really, really cool thing to happen. These are coniferous, deciduous trees. So really, really awesome, a pretty special tree to take a look at. And that means that whether you are in the Arboretum to look at the maple trees or our coniferous trees or evergreens or our coniferous deciduous trees, definitely check them out. They're a really, really special tree to take a look at, and just another example of how many cool things there are out there in nature for us to enjoy. So thank you so much for hanging out with us this week, and we hope to see you next week.